Hey Eric, welcome to the All Walks of Life podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on, man.
Hi, Sham. Thank you. The pleasure's all mine.
I'm really intrigued by your work because I think followers of the podcast would know I'm a history buff myself, even though I'm not
Right.
studying it at university or whatnot. And your Instagram page really in that sense. So yeah, let's just start talking about that in the sense that where did things start off from there, and yeah, what was the inspiration?
All right. So, itihasology was a venture that I think was initially very personally driven because I think that with Indian history, especially, there has been this textbook based obsession. There has been this, also a failure to transcend those boundaries of, textbook based history. It's become a lot about names, dates, and places rather than establishing connections between the past and the present, and also to constantly seek a purpose. So I think people fail to do that. People fail to establish relevancy and they consider history to be a dead subject. So ethnology began with the aim of transcending these textbook boundaries and trying to see where we can fit Indian history in terms of popular imagination, and how can we capture the essence of Indian history that goes beyond these names. It engages itself with music, fashion, with cinema, with unheard stories, with some struggles you might have never heard of, and of our evolution as Indians and as a part of India. Because the point is that when you think about history, and when you think about history in an international sense, there is very little relevancy and there's very little representation of the Indian past. So I think that was the main purpose, to perhaps represent and also to go beyond that stereotypical image of historians being these very dusty 90-year-old sophisticated figures that young people can too be interested in this. And basically, I don't want to use the word because I think I'll be cancelled, but I want to make history cool again. I don't know if cool is a word that's allowed anymore, but yeah, that was the point.
Yeah, I mean, being cancelled is like a big thing. But the thing is, what I say is that if people are canceling Mahatma Gandhi and Richard Feynman, so who
Right.
are even we to?
Exactly. Well, who are we in this universe of a Mahatma? Exactly.
Wait, so
Right.
I don't know if you've heard about a couple of these names. So Dan Carlin and Daniele Bolelli. So they have two great podcasts. I'd recommend it to any history lover out there. They're called so Dan Carlin's podcast is called Hardcore History, and
Okay.
Daniele Bolelli does this podcast called History on Fire, and they are immense, and they're such great works of telling history in a think the essence that you're touching about. I think they do that in their works as well, of how, of at least from what I've gathered in looking at academia, and you're probably in a better space to comment here,
Mhm.
that as you said, that historians or academics really want to fit things in boxes and say, okay, this was maybe the way
Mhm.
history was, and almost even reject new ideas that may come out. So I've
Right.
spoken to archaeologists and historians on the podcast before, and they've said that that's one of the frustrations they have as well, of even if something as new archaeology is being discovered, it's
Mhm.
not even being looked at because it can go against all that they have come across recently. So what are your thoughts on that?
So yeah, that's a very interesting, question and a statement, because the thing with history is what people don't realize is that history is very much political. It's very much a statement, because when you're making historical statements, you are stretching a sort of thread back to a time. And as Indians, I'm going to talk strictly in sense of India right now. We are very much a hamare zamane mein people. If hamare zamane mein ye, hamare zamane mein wo, and this zamana is always glorified. When you're a part of, we today, we talk about how the times are, so trashy and we don't like what's happening. But in 10 years from now, there's a possibility we'll be saying this to our children. Hamare zamane mein to ye hota tha, and you're living in this. So, because history is so political, the idea of changing it, the idea of changing it in the light of new information can be damaging to a reputation, can be damaging to the idea of a glorious past. That, I always held this idea that this can't happen. And with rigid boundaries, what historians do is The entire debate around ancient, medieval, and modern, how we have categorized things. Do you think people in the ancient were like, all right, tomorrow is medieval, so let's enter that. Then medieval came, and the whites, you see the whites in the distance, so the modern period is here. It isn't like that, right? There is ancient. At the same time, there is also early medieval. There are factions of early medieval somewhere else. So the point is that history is not so rigid. It can't be viewed in ways in which we have simplified it. This will give us an illusion of simplicity and certainty. But the point of a historian is to complicate things, is to bring about a canvas and spread everything around. And with new research, what happens a lot of times is, right now we even have fields like space archaeology. This has not been introduced in India, but we have Sarah Parcak. She's a space archaeologist who's
Yeah, I
doing
think I've heard
stuff.
her name. Yeah, yeah.
Right. Yeah. So we have a lot of interesting people coming up, and it's not that research is not always accepted, but what's accepted is what's fashionable to accept. It's what will add to the glory rather than reduce it. And right now you can see we are living internationally in an atmosphere where people are constantly attempting to rewrite history. That history has been written in a certain way, and now it's going to be rewritten. While these attempts can be made, these two are driven by then by agendas to counter another agenda. So fitting new researches in such an environment, it's a hostile environment. I say historians are some of the most unsafe people. I don't want to name any historians today, but I have seen historians walking into conference rooms with 5 bodyguards because they were
Oh
told
God.
that you can be shot today. So these things happen. So yeah, that's a very true statement that recent research is because of how politics is, it can a lot of times be undermined, and there are rigid boundaries for school students. If you're familiar with the way in which Indian school systems are work, boundaries are so rigid that history ends with 15th August 1947. That history, the last thing is, all right, you got independence, a country was divided, one country got freedom, the other one got to, but we won't talk about that. A man with a spinning wheel and wrapped in a khadi, he did some stuff, good stuff, non-violence was his armor, and yeah, that's the end of history, and everything after that is just what you are doing right now. So yeah, there are rigid boundaries, and that is a problem.
Do you feel it's not only a thing in history, but history as well, but all aspects of society really? So this aspect that we are almost married to our ideas, and that
Mhm.
if anyone comes about with even just a different way of looking at things, we won't entertain it because we are so tribal with our ideas and these ideologies that we hold. Be it in any landscape, really, be it in politics with the political parties we represent,
Mhm.
be it in the food we eat, in let's say vegetarianism or veganism, non-vegetarianism. So don't you feel it's almost this aspect that's happening in society right now, that people are almost becoming tribal in the way they look at things?
Right. Yeah, the thing is, we do break down with collapse, with ideas collapsing, and this breakdown happens because of this constant conditioning of growing up in an environment which just imposes this way of working in a society or functioning in a society. And once these functions, once we establish that these are established functions, any other things that emerge out of this context, they are automatically given this sort of inferior stance, this sort of stance of going beyond what's orthodox. And yes, that's true, because see, what happens is, people are not essentially just humans trying to survive through means of biological evolution, but we are also cultural beings. We are also beings who are constantly forming ourselves through ideas. And once we start seeing that there is this hostility towards our ideas, we start to question our own beliefs. We start to question, and when we start to question our own beliefs, we in turn start questioning our very own existence. Because if our ideas form us, right, we exist on the basis of our ideas, and you're breaking that idea, then I'm questioning my own existence. I'm questioning what I've always believed. And to believe a new thing is going to be going back to square one, and that's just being lazy again. Do you want to restart? Do you want to
Hmm.
start thinking from a new perspective? You want to go back to square one, be a toddler again. So I think that's something that, And this needs to change, because people don't realize that even with ideas, though I'm not someone who blames religion for things or constantly say that just because you're religious you are stupid, or you don't have you can't argue with me through that perspective. There are certain beliefs and there's certain ideas that would definitely need to catch up with the times, that would definitely need to be allocated in accordance to the needs outside. These entire ideas of being woke or being
Mm.
historically conscious. For example, the trans community in India, the Hijras. So, the idea of seeing them as outsiders, largely it's viewed as, these people are viewed in certain. So there is an idea that these people come on the street, they clap, and they come to weddings or to a birth, and they ask for money, and or they are prostitutes. These are some of the jobs that are associated. These are the stereotypical ideas we have of them. Now, the idea of beginning to accept these communities in mainstream culture, their representation in perhaps movies, or getting them jobs, or getting them to do things beyond these stereotypical ideas that we have fashioned of them, that is still uncomfortable for a lot of people, because these are not ideas that they have grown up with. They haven't grown up with going to a shopping store and seeing a trans person who is a
Mm.
salesperson, right?
Mm.
They haven't seen that. But if only we were to become more conscious, if only were we to think about the fact that these people too have evolved with us, and I'm going to just thrust history here too, that once you begin realizing that these people too have a history, these people too have had that evolution, they too belong to the same time period, and their ideas and how they're existing is equally valuable. I think only then can we perhaps be more open to new ideas and new things coming about. Otherwise, we are just stuck in our own loops.
What I find fascinating, and this may be a place where we disagree, and it's not to get too philosophical,
Mm.
but I feel, I think from what I've gathered from what you spoke about there, that almost we come to ideas come to we come towards ideas. So almost ideas are generated in society or societal constructs, and then we almost gather them to form our opinions or whatnot. I mean, I'm more about Jungian philosophy. I don't know if you know the name of Carl Jung. So he spoke about this aspect that ideas almost come to us, and I mean, it's a very deep thought of how we may have scientific truth, and people may classify that to be the only truth in society, but I find moral truth to be almost scientific truth to be grounded in moral truth, and that's something very interesting to grapple with, really. And so yeah, I just threw it out there. I'm not sure, have you thought about these topics?
Do you believe in the concept of original ideas?
No, I feel that our ideas in some way, shape, or form, and this will take us to the discussion of free will and consciousness in that sense.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I feel I don't feel we have original ideas by any stretch of the imagination. I feel that ideas are almost, as I said, they come to us,
Mhm.
and it's and and that's the sort of thing I was talking about with scientific truth and moral truth. Many people, and it's not so evident to me that what scientists study and what we study is is what's actually there in society, and it's actually representative of the nature of reality in that sense.
Mhm.
There have been numerous times where through the studies we've done, through experiments we've done, and just to understand, I'm pro science by all stretch of the
Right.
imagination, but to say that we should throw away religion, or we should be throwing away, let's say, myths
Mhm.
in that sense, I don't
Mhm.
particularly agree with that. And that this is a particular conversation I was having with someone else I had on the podcast,
Right.
Mr. Utkarsh Patel, who's a mythologist, and who
All
talks
right.
about how myths may be something that may seem trivial to us in the modern day, but there's almost a deeper lying metaphysic to them, which is really important to understand in the day and age we live in. And I'm not sure if you know the names of Joseph Campbell and Jordan Peterson in the West, who talk a lot about this aspect as well.
Right.
So yeah.
So yeah, so myth making, that's a very good point about myths. So I'll actually relate this to how
It's
myths not
Eric
only.
almost like, think about it in this way. It's almost like what we may to be factual in that sense, what we may consider to be,
Mm.
for example, how much coffee I have in my mug. All right,
Mhm.
and that's a fact that we have. But to find an almost a way we can model society around, we can almost
Mhm.
model society around that fact. We almost have to have something that's transcendent, that's something that is beyond the ordinary, so that people uh, like coming in the coming generations can say that, oh, if I act in the most moral sense, if I act in the most
Mm.
individualistic sense, and be just moral towards my acts to society, I will that will be the most beneficial for society in that sense.
Mhm. Right. So, going to your earlier idea, though, before we discuss this, about myths and about what's rational or what's not and what's scientific. Though, of course, there is scientific, and the thing with in in this subject too, in this discipline too, a lot of times I do see that there is this academic orientation towards finding this sort of scientific truth. Getting closest to the scientific reality that could be. But the thing is, history is of course not mathematics. I think Ramchandra Guha
Hmm.
said this. You can only get closest to this truth, and this truth is also
Yeah.
what we would want to believe is the truth about the question of myth making. And myths are also not just dead stories of the past. They of course influence the present. So for example, I was talking about hijras earlier. There is this entire story that they have, that when Rama was leaving for exile in the forest, they followed him all the way to the gates of the forest. And when he reached there, he looked back and he said, all right, all the men and women, you can go back. And then he goes, and after 14 years he comes back and he sees that the hijras are still there. And he asks them, why are you still here? He said, and they say, you only told the men and the women to go back. Now this does not have a basis in the Valmiki Ramayana. It's not a part of the Valmiki Ramayana, but this is still a practice in myth making which has sort of given them. So this is one of the stories from which they derive their powers of blessing today. This is the sort of relevancy that they give to themselves in a society. So this myth is very much a fact, and it's very much a reason for them to exist the way they exist. So myths are also not existing in isolation. They exist and they give relevancy to people in the present. And thus, when these things exist around us, it becomes hard to constantly give this sort of superior edge to scientific inquiry and only looking at this is a historical fact. Because
Yeah.
that too is a question. What is a fact? Is a fact what you want to believe it is? Because there can be this alternative history or reality too. So yeah.
Oh yeah, that's so fascinating with the topic you brought about with two facts in that sense, and how even if the historical facts we have, if they actually are true, because there is only so much that we can actually study and actually say that something's genuine and something's not. So yeah, that's another fascinating topic to go down into.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, some of the other questions I had were, yeah, so like in the sense of this aspect of trying to make history as accurate as possible. Like, what are some of the measures that we can take? Have you ever given that a thought? Like, obviously, we can read the books, we can look at the archaeological findings, but there's only so much we can say. And obviously, the famous quote is history is told by the victors. So have you ever thought
Right.
about the accuracy part of things?
Okay. So thank you for introducing the victors part because I have a lot to say about that. Um, so historical accuracy in the first place, and now going strictly textbook again. Now talking in terms of this as a strict discipline, as an academic discipline, which requires you to be trained. So there are, of course, as you mentioned, historical sources, textual sources, which are not only scholarly arguments but primary sources from a particular period that you want to reconstruct. There are also, of course, archaeological endeavors that are taken up to sort of reach that point of accuracy. But the question is that when you make this theoretical, when you go from primary sources and when you go from archaeology to writing this down, that's when things get complicated, right? Because that's when you're choosing to then interpret things your way. Because okay, let's take the example of Harappa, the Harappan civilization. Now the Harappan civilization is the script has not been deciphered till today. We don't know what they said, and I constantly say that we have silenced the Harappan. So whatever we make of them today is through their archaeological remains and what we have gathered. So what have we gathered? What do our historical senses tell us? Some of the things that come to our mind when we think about Harappa, they had a wonderful drainage system. Their sanitary systems were so good. There was a dancing girl and there was a priest king. And that's that, fine. In popular culture, going beyond India, you only hear of Mesopotamia and Egypt and the story ends there.
Mm.
Now, on topic of historical accuracy, there were there have been arguments that you look at Harappa and you look at the sanitation system and you look at the drainage system. These people were very hygienic. These people were very good. Now you look at the sculptures that have remained. Everybody seems affluent. So there have been, of course, arguments at times that this, since the image of the society is so good, perhaps everybody lived well, and everybody enjoyed an equal status. And because we have not translated the text, so the most we can go to is that there were perhaps some kings, multiple kings, one king. There's a lot of confusion. But then as to become more accurate, to you need to complicate things. You can't just accept things at face value. So you're looking at drainage system. That's very good. The sanitary system is so good. You're looking at a big structure and you're like, fine, that was constructed perhaps under the patronage of a king. But you have to look beyond. There are people making these structures, right? There are people maintaining the drainage system. There are people who might be in charge of making sure that the sanitation is in place and maintained. What places could these people who have not survived, who have not survived history, as it were, what do we make of these people? And then how accurate is our image? Then can you say that there was not a class system? Can you, for example, say that because the sculpture of a priest king exists, this society was affluent? There was somebody making that sculpture of the priest king, right? So there are people beyond these paintings who were perhaps not represented, and we don't know anything about them. So historical accuracy a lot of time becomes about further complicating what you already have. This
Mm.
simplifying is, something that does major harm. That's again, with rigid boundaries of ancient, medieval, modern, you have to complicate things. So that's
Yeah.
what I'd like to say about
I'm
that.
guessing. I'm guessing. When people are saying that they want no class or something, those going to all of those people probably saying that are going to be Marxists or something. Saying, "Oh, look, there's another example of how Marxism."
Well,
So funny,
right.
so funny.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's so fascinating though, because our representation almost depends on what we see, and almost the representations we have. And I've gone through the rabbit hole of ancient Egypt, and I find them
Mhm.
such an interesting civilization in that sense. I don't know if you're well versed with the work of Graham Hancock and John Anthony West, who talk about how they were almost a very modern civilization, but the fact that they simply died out because of something that occurred, which we don't really know about as of yet. But
Mhm.
but but the aspects such as medieval science that they had to accurately predict that the sun's rotation in 72 years would be an accurate position for them to build the sphinx, or for them to
Mhm.
actually build the pyramid, which till date we don't know how that's
Yeah,
come across.
how that would work,
so
yes.
so yeah, I mean, that's really fascinating in my eyes, that the things, as you were touching upon over there as well, that whatever's in front of us is the only thing we can read from, and there may be so
Mhm.
much more to it. Like,
Yeah.
I was listening to this conversation by someone who wrote an excellent book on one of the earliest remains of let's say a humanoid, let's say someone who was an ancestor of ours, and this was back in the day, and this preceded the earliest humanoid sculpture that we had by, let's say, 2 million years, or something extraordinary. And that was only something we came across in the last 10-15 years. So
Mhm.
imagine, just because of archaeological finding, if we can actually find something that can totally change the way we look at history, it's so fascinating to me. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think so. You use the word, so I completely agree with everything, but you use the word modern, how Egyptians were so modern. So you see,
Yeah, so
these
that's
things
probably me.
also,
I'm not an
yeah,
academics.
yeah. So I'm just saying these things also change over time, because what history has done and how it's been fashioned is that we just associate ideas of scientific rationality, superiority with modernity.
Yeah, exactly.
And that is, of course, a problem, because and that's something that was done by traditional historiography also, that there is this period from you go from being barbaric to being civilized, till the time when the whites just came to India, and when history writing began to begin to started to fashion itself, you see that there were these images, that these perceptions of the past that they had, that we are now here to civilize this ahistorical society. The society, first of all, has no history. That was one of the ideas. And now we are going to civilize them through, our ways, our modes. So yeah, the idea of looking at things in a modern sense and then giving them that superiority. And secondly, what you said about how our entire idea of the past can change when in light of new research. Um, Already, I think there are a lot of things that can change our perspective towards the past or even how we study the past. But because
Hmm.
these systems have been established so
Yeah.
strongly, it'll be hard. So I'll give you an example here. So how we view history in terms of perhaps in schools, in terms of names, dates, places, and kings. The question becomes, who makes history? Who is who survives this, and who is perhaps making it? So there is this, if you know about the king Ashoka,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
Mauryan
Yeah.
emperor Ashoka, right? Because, well, he's given a lot of light in schools. So one of the things that he did was he used to spread his message through the use of inscriptions. The message of Ashoka was disseminated through the use of stone inscriptions. Messages were written on these huge slabs all around wherever he used to. They were from Delhi to Karnataka. There were these slabs, and his message was there, and usually beginning with a lot of grandeur and glory. Thus speaks the king. And so you have these ideas of a king. You have the idea of this king existing, and you're giving him enough importance. Fine, he's. But yet, there are people who are going around from the north to the south to write these messages. And there's this very interesting person. I wish I knew more about him, but he has just left one trace behind for us. In Karnataka, in Brahmagiri, once Ashoka said that, I want a message to be written. And the scribe goes there, writes the message. It begins with, "Thus speaks the king." And it has all the messages about how to, conduct yourself, how to talk to your family, friends. And after all of this grandeur and glory of the king, at the end of this stone slab, the scribe has written, he's signed off, written by Chapada the scribe. This never happened. None of these inscriptions have the signature of the scribe. And he too then immortalized his name in the same stone slab, and he too has made history. But are we talking about the scribes behind the message? So we already have,
Hmm.
these little bits and pieces which we can get together to sort of look at the past in a new way. But of course, established things, established ideas again, and in the light of new ideas, it can become a little hostile.
That's so fascinating, isn't it? Like if you look at ancient Indian civilizations, or I think even Western civilization to some extent, that and I guess this relates to the aspect of the caste system in India as well in some shape or form. That the Kshatriyas were almost who almost let's say given the tasks of running empires and doing things like that, didn't really spend time indulging in aspects like knowledge, or like reading books, or trying to let's say get a grasp on things like that, whereas that task was left away to the Brahmins or something like that. Whereas if you look at society today, knowledge is power in that sense. Knowledge is king. If you know a lot more things, for the most part, really, in a meritocratic society, you will eventually do well. So that's a fascinating road to go down into, of how roles have changed, in the sense that it isn't, yeah, obviously, I guess that's a simple thing to say, that it's not really something to society isn't based on birth, as say, but on merit to
Mhm.
some extent, really. So yeah, that's fascinating.
Right.
A particular question I had on Ashoka was that, I don't know if this is a myth, or if this is just, yeah, it was something that did he kill 99 of his siblings, or is that just something that's thrown about?
I'm not too sure about the historical accuracy of that, but I do know that, under his rule, a lot of Jainas were killed, a lot of other,
Yeah.
sects, and with even the coming up of Ashoka to the throne, and Nayanjot Lahiri has done really good work on this, her work called Ashoka, and with him coming to the throne, and with him then conducting himself as a king and then later as a Buddhist king. There have been a
Hmm.
lot and lot of ideas and myths surrounding this. So, for example, there is this another myth that there was this So Ajivikas are people who are usually not talked about in discussions of Buddhism and Jainism. Ajivikas were another sect during the same time.
So who are
Uh,
they?
so these are people believing in free will.
Okay.
So and I think they were also always nude. So these were things that they and so and but about our jivikas is that we don't have any primary sort of um, sources to go by. All of the sources that we have of them are from a Buddhist or these Jaina sources. So now what happens is that there is this story that once when Ashoka, that there was, in the court of Ashoka, an Ajivika was called before Ashoka was king. So an Ajivika was called, and um, he was asked who is going to be the next king, and he didn't say anything because apparently Ashoka's father didn't really like Ashoka. This is one of those that he wanted some someone. So what happens is that he, instead of saying who will become the king, he says the one who has the best mount, the one who eats the best, the one who drinks the best. This very philosophically just engages. And they're like that person will be king. And then Ashoka goes to his mother and says, the mount of an elephant is my this, the rice bowl is my this, and I shall be king. So there are a lot of stories about how there are a lot of myth making around Ashoka. So I'm not very sure about the historical accuracy of that. I've not also read Ashoka widely or indulged a lot in Mauryan studies. So perhaps I'm not the best person to answer that.
No, because it's so fascinating because the general perception I get and the people whom I've spoken to and the way they speak about Ashoka is almost how you've described it as later on in his life he almost became this Buddhist philosopher, Buddhist scholar, and almost left responsibilities of the kingdom to the bare necessities, so that if there was an attack, only then will I be defending my throne and wouldn't be
Mhm.
indulging in, let's say, capturing other territories around the world. So that's really, but yeah, like even the evolution of that person would be something that's interesting to go down into.
And I need to correct myself. I said free will, right? Believed in
If there's
everything being
something if there's
totally
something
determined.
if there's something you've opened up, you feel free to share your screen as well, if there's some
Something lost.
pictorial thing or whatever.
Wait, I lost you. Could you
Oh,
repeat?
I was just saying that if there's anything you're pulling up and you find interesting, feel free to share it, share your screen or something. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Right. No, but I just remember that I said free will. It was everything is determined, so you don't really have a role in
So no, okay.
Sajivika's.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
Sajivika's
no
fashion
free
themselves
will,
according to.
basically. Yeah.
Yeah, perhaps that everything is determined, and then you can't really do much
Yeah,
to
I
that.
guess we didn't come to your idea of that. Like you asked me about if I believe in free will to some extent, but what is do you have a particular take on that, on free will?
Right. So I asked you the question about original ideas, right?
Yeah.
Um, I don't think there are any original ideas, because first thing is that what you think of might have been thought of, so that sort of
Hmm.
negates the possibility of an original idea. But secondly, the idea of something being original is then you questioning whether this original idea is emerging out of isolation or if it's emerging out of a construction of all the other ideas you already are aware of, a compilation, and then being like, okay, this is my idea. Then you need to trace an origin of an original idea. So basically, I know a lot of things. I know this cream exists. I know these sunglasses exist. I know a lot of this exists, and then I bring all of this together, and I'm like, okay, this is now my idea. Now, is this an original idea, or is this just a construction of everything I already know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this is a result rather than an invention, right? So in that matter, and the idea of free will, just me talking to you right now and thinking I have a free will, rather than me thinking that everything I've done till today has resulted to this very move. And as students of history, I think believing in free will at a point completely ceases to exist, because you begin to think that everything produces a consequence. Whatever you do produces a consequence. And then if you think about it in terms of a dominoes falling down, I don't know if me sitting here is simply I responded to your mail saying, yes, I'd like to have that conversation, or is it simply a result of what all I had done prior to that and leading me to this very moment? So, on the matter of free will, anything that I say is going to give me a crisis.
Yeah.
So, yes, that's that.
No, I mean that's all right, because if physicists and neuroscientists are still figuring it out, so who even are we to
Mm.
say?
Exactly, I know. So, what do you think? But could you elaborate? What's your idea of,
I mean,
free will?
so I think I don't think you understood my point correctly, because I think what you're speaking of, from what I gathered right now, is a very deterministic approach,
Mhm.
to the aspects that almost everything is determined, and we're simply reacting to it in some way, shape, or
Mhm.
form. Is that correct?
Yeah, that whatever is right now is simply a result of what is but the factor which determines is, of course, then something that I have not identified till now, because this determiner is the past a determiner. So if the past is a determiner, the action that you have conducted in the past determines what you are right now, then are you responsible for those actions in the past? Because if you are, then perhaps you had the free will in the past, or when you began your actions.
Hmm.
But if this is determined through this external force, which I have not really dealt with, I've dealt with the idea of it being through in an historical context, um, that's when I start thinking about, this being, if there is an external force, involved, then I start thinking about this in sense of this being determined and perhaps no free will
Hmm.
existing.
Right. It's see, like, something. It's something I'm still peddling around. Like, I
Mhm.
think the way you're speaking is very much of what Sam Harris talks about. I don't know if you know his name and in the work he does, but like, I genuinely feel that, to some extent, we do have some authority in whatever we do, um, and this takes me back to this aspect of why we study some things and why we don't study some things, and that's where it becomes a little bit, it meddles things up, because we are almost drawn towards some things, because not only of survival, but I genuinely feel there's this aspect of moral truth to it, and this takes me back to the question of
Mhm.
myths and why they are relevant. So I would say no. I think we still have some authority over the actions that we put forward, but obviously it's very much garnered on our past experiences, on how we interact in the world, the ideas that's formed us, and religions we've been brought up in, and things like
Mhm.
that. So yeah.
Right. Okay. All right.
So we were talking about this aspect that, I think we started off talking about this, really, of how, um, there are some movies, some works of fiction that that have tried to popularize Indian history to some
Mhm.
extent. Let's say we can draw upon examples of Jodha Akbar. We can draw upon examples of some of the other works that they've tried to represent a sort of element of Indian history,
Mhm.
be it in Bollywood, be it in fictional books, be it in sorry, historical fiction, be it, or even history books in that matter.
Mhm.
So yeah, what are your takeaways with that? Because I know there are some people, like some really nerdy history people, who say that no, they're doing a total disservice in the movies they're making.
Right.
Or do you still feel that even if there are some things are inaccurate, obviously you'd like them to be accurate for
Mhm.
the most part, but the fact that they're putting it out as pop culture in the mass media is a great thing for history itself.
Right. So even with the people who might complain about the fact that they're doing disservice, so there's this particular misrepresentation and so on and so forth. The thing that India has also failed to give rise to is film historians, for example. So you don't have that also, right? Sitting people who will be doing this. So the question of integrating anything in popular culture. Um, right now I'm seeing this sudden spark in so there are these writers of history who are not academically engaging with the past in a way that scholars are supposed to. But so you have names like Manu Pillai and William
Yeah, yeah.
Dalrymple and Ira Mukhoti, and these people who are writing books, trying to make it a very engaging experience for young people or for anybody who wants to be interested in the past. With the question of movies, the entire question is then not about disservice. It's about and it's not even about misrepresentation, because even outside, even in movies, like, I've not seen any of these movies. I don't know, it just really annoys me thinking about it. I have not seen The Return. I don't even know if it's called The Return of the Mummy, or these
I haven't.
movies. Yeah, so these movies based on the mummies and these Egyptian histories and all. So much in this is absolutely flawed.
Oh
But
yeah.
you then have people who are engaging with popular culture, historians of popular culture, famous historians, who sit down and tell the people, this is what's wrong and this is what's not. Since we don't even have that culture, then I guess it becomes a problem. The problem is not whether the movie is doing a disservice or not, because how many historians do you have sitting to write the script with you or to write the storyline
Mm.
with you? You
Mm-hmm.
need to engage with that first, because I'm not blaming a director for having no historian on his side and then basing his entire movie based on Wikipedia, which is, you know what it is. It's just written by us. We can edit it whenever we want and we can write whatever we want. So in India, but what has happened is I still haven't seen um, history going beyond perhaps the perhaps Jodha. And there was this another movie, Mohenjo-daro, which was on based on Harappa, featuring Hrithik Roshan, which I'm guilty of having watched that. I did see that, and I didn't forgive myself for a long time. But then but then I began to wonder that perhaps these are some pieces of this really incomplete puzzle which are coming together to form a popular culture around history. But you see these other, so you for Egypt hi le lo, when you
Hmm.
when you talk about Egypt, Egypt is not just a part of the past that's dead. It's so much a part of popular culture that the way in which, so there's this imagination of an Egyptian cat, and this Egyptian cat is present in movies and fashion and sort of aesthetic decor. I want a sort of like a Egyptian vibe in my room. People say,
Hmm.
do you hear people saying I want a Harappan vibe in my room? No, because you just haven't talked about what do you mean by a Harappan vibe. So, we are not vibing with the Indian past, and we need to begin vibing with it, because that's the popular culture part of it.
See,
Yeah.
but like, however cringy we might find like these Indian
Mm,
historical movies, or however inaccurate we might find them, don't
mhm,
you feel to some extent they're making the same? They're almost human in the sense, and they're still making the same mistake that the academics are making in in some sense. Because even the academics, to some extent, the historians, or whichever field we may say, are only trying to pick out things that they've learned through the history books maybe back in the day,
mm.
and aren't looking at maybe new information that's coming in. So maybe they are as guilty as the filmmakers in that sense. So if they're almost portraying what they want to portray. So if you took the example of Mohenjo-daro, it's more a love story than it is a historical movie in that sense, or at least what I've gathered from people who watched it.
So, yeah, all right. But the difference gets created when, when masses begin then perceiving this
Hmm.
past through a lens of perhaps a director who is not, let's take the example of a director who's not trained historically. And I do give no matter how much I constantly criticize the system I am in, but the system I am in is going to make me what I'm going to be. So I then have to take a stand for these scholars who are historically. Now, so let's take the example, for example, so Doordarshan's Ramayana is very popular, and
Hmm.
during this lockdown period, it was revived and people were watching it. The issue is that a lot of people then begin, so even with the Ramayana, the sort of way in which Doordarshan has popularized Ramayana, or Amar Chitra Katha has, a lot of people start believing that the Lakshman Rekha, for example, it didn't happen. It didn't happen in the Valmiki Ramayana. It's not a part of it. Um, and but the Lakshman Rekha is such a part of popular culture. When you ask somebody about the Ramayana, that's like, what do you remember about? Everybody is like, this scene of that Lakshman Rekha being drawn. But if and then they associate, so then this gets associated with the Valmiki Ramayana because people just seem to
Yeah.
remember that text. When of course there were texts in the 15th century and other texts that came in which there was a Lakshman Rekha, and the original, if we consider the Valmiki Ramayana to be central, authoritative, and original, the Lakshman Rekha is not a part of it. So then, when somebody tells me that I know a lot about Ramayana, I have seen Doordarshan, then you are sort of doing disservice to yourself by believing
Hmm.
certain. Even in the Amar Chitra Katha, the Lakshman Rekha is there. So until unless they are claiming that they are basing their Ramayana on this particular version, then fine, go ahead with it, right? But when you are interacting with masses who have certain ideas of history, who associate the Ramayana with Valmiki, who then are going to fashion their ideas on the basis of what you're showing them, then I guess it's your responsibility to perhaps bring it again closest to the truth, or closest to what is the most accurate. So yeah, that's what I would say there.
Eric, who was the other, like, obviously I think Balmiki Ramayana is the original text that's there, but who was the other? There's, I think, the other author.
Tulsidas
Tulsi,
Ramcharit,
yeah,
yeah.
that's the more popular one, isn't it? Like, that's the one that people generally refer to, even if it's not the original.
Yes, so Ramcharitmanas is Tulsi Das's version of the Ramayana, and around 16th, 17th century. I think that's the time period. Yeah, that is a very popular text. The way in which it's written, because it's more of like a devotional text.
Yeah.
It's written in this sort of form of devotion towards the god. And Valmiki Ramayana, it's written in this sort of form of and I think with the Valmiki Ramayana, a lot of people who have read texts, um, our generation has relied a lot on Amar Chitra Katha. A lot of because of this influence of graphic novels and comics, and then trying to just be like, okay. And right now, chalo, I won't name him. Right now, whoever this popular mythologist is, who is not doing great service to Indian mythology, I won't name him, but his name starts with a D. So, right. So, yeah, Tulsi Das's Ramcharitmanas is popular, but I wouldn't say that even that is like widely read. I mean, I wouldn't say
Okay.
that people. Uh, it's not about that. It's not more popular. It's about the fact that a lot of people don't really engage with these texts that they're saying they're engaging with. Nobody
Yeah.
sits down
Yeah.
and fully reads it, and that's very sad. Because no matter what you think about a particular type of history or what you consider mythology, to make an opinion on it, you need to know about it. You need to have read it. And people just don't do that because they're sort of in this idea of Valmiki Ramayana being written in a way that's just going to, or even Tulsidas's version being written in a way that's not going to be very engaging. But there are, of course, interesting English translations now that have come out, which people can read and then perhaps make their opinions.
No, it's such a fascinating thing. So there's several things I'd like to unpick here. So as I was mentioning, I was referring to a conversation I had with this mythologist called Utkarsh Patel, and I think he's done some great work. So he was called to give a talk at Ayodhya, and the crowd he was speaking to, he didn't speak about. I'm not sure if you know about this. There are different. Obviously, there's so many versions of the Ramayana, but there's also this version that's written by some Bengali scholar who's written it as a feminist, as like a feminist approach to the Ramayana almost. And he was talking about some of these lesser known Ramayanas out there, and the crowd over there, they got really frustrated because they said that, oh, why are you talking to us about these Ramayanas, and why aren't you even talking to us about Tulsidas's Ramayana, which we consider to be the right Ramayana. That's what
Mm-hmm.
they were saying, and it stems to so much of what you're saying here, that even if they haven't read these texts, even if they haven't, let's say, like, for the matter that they haven't read these texts, and they almost possessed with this ideology that just because my friend said, or almost what I've been fed by society really is what I'll subscribe to in that sense. And this brings you back to the conversation you were having about ideas. So,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know if, I don't want to get into trouble speaking about this, but there's also this aspect of things that associate with feminism which actually don't stand for feminism, but what most people what most people get almost possessed by the ideology. They don't take the time to read what the primary scholars have said and what their idea is, but almost get gathered by this herd mentality that surrounds it. And that's one of the reasons why I always propagate free speech and things like that, because however radical an idea may seem to you, who is to say your idea is correct, right? So how find the Communist Manifesto, I'd still take the time to read it, and I'd still take the time to actually sit down with the Marxist philosopher and try to understand their perception, which I think is really missing in society.
On the question of this being that case being happening at Ayodhya, yeah, the I people do, and then you can't question, like you really can't tell somebody to be like, no, you can't consider that authoritative, because when certain people have
Hmm.
some ideas, why would you want to go out of your way and break something that they hold so closely? So basically, I can't. I remember
Wait,
when I
but don't you feel this becomes really important though? Because we're talking about this aspect that's almost the word of God in that sense. If you're talking about a script like the Ramayana or the Mahabharata, so if they have a misinformed, let's say, who are we to say if it's misinformed? But let's say if it's not from the original text almost, and it's almost a sequel to it, or almost a different altercation to it, and they're almost saying that this is the word of God and that's how we'll act in society based on this particular book or this script, then it's harmful. Because from my understanding, sorry, I shut
no,
up
no, no,
after
yeah,
this.
continue, yeah, yeah.
From my understanding of the Tulsidas Ramayana, why most people in, let's say, Ayodhya, I wouldn't want to circle them out in particular, and why it's so popular, I feel, is because there is almost this essence. It depicts that Sita is almost subordinate to Ram, and whereas in Balmiki's Ramayana, if you actually read it, from what I've gathered, is that they actually showed as equals and things like that, and then that almost stems to becoming an ideology if you read the wrong text. That's my concern with it, at least.
No, don't say wrong text, but yeah, so other texts.
Other
So in
text,
these
yeah.
systems, yeah.
What's wrong? Yeah.
Yeah, right. So with yeah, the question about Sita, yes, it's a very interesting area to explore the representation of Sita in the Valmiki Ramayana. In the Valmiki Ramayana, her voice is constantly there, and she is engaging, she is teaching what she thinks is dharma, and she is opining a lot. And you also see that and one of the things that I see people not considering or acknowledging is that yes, the story is about Rama defeating Ravana and then Sita being left free from the Lanka, but till the time Rama was not there, till the time the war was not fought, Sita was there on her own. She constantly tormented. She was saving herself too. So yes, there is a question of that. But the thing is, even if somebody and I strong so there is also a Ramayana from I can't remember the name, but there's a Ramayana in which Sita, so there's this entire, a questioning, answering session between Rama and Sita, where on the question of whether she should go with him to the forest or not. This is something that
Hmm.
happens in every Ramayana, that, before he leaves to the forest, Sita says, I want to come with you, but he constantly questions. He constantly, tries to tell her, no, no, you can't, no, you can't. And she reasons with him. This is something that happens in the Valmiki Ramayana too. She reasons with him that when I was young, I was told that when I grow up, my husband will be exiled, and then I'll be leaving with him to the forest and all that. In this Ramayana, what happens is, after she reasons, gives all of the reasons, she then says, Ram, have you never read Ramayana? In which Ramayana does Sita not go with Ram to the forest? And that's so fascinating, because you have you have Sita herself being acquainted with Ramayanas. Does sort of saying that yes, there are other versions of the Ramayana, but on the question of importance being attributed to a text, I think that question cannot be homogenized, because it depends again from text to text,
Yeah.
and from religion to religion, and from a particular idea to another idea. When it comes to a topic which is sensitive, no matter how much we want to believe in imposing academic accuracy, no matter how much we want to believe, there are still societies who, when historians and archaeologists go there and they say, we want to trace back your
Hmm. Hmm.
life, we want to write about your history, and they're like, Who are you when our grandparents did that for us? They told us our stories, we believe that. Some of them don't have concepts of time like we do. So when it comes to topics like beliefs, and when it comes to certain ideas which, can be vulnerable in sensitive territories, there I wouldn't go and say, what you're reading is wrong. I would definitely say, introduce yourselves to complications again, read more widely. But then this is a very sensitive area to go into, and telling somebody that, what text you are reading is not something that you should read, or not something that you should entirely believe in.
Right. Okay. So I was probably in a wrong place to say that.
Mhm.
Let's say if they are reading a particular text, as you're saying,
Mm.
the simple thing is we can say is that at least indulge yourself in reading widely, reading other texts maybe, and other philosophies, other ways of looking at the world. And what if they say that no, because this is the word of God in our sense, why should we even consider reading something else? Because the meaning of everything I need to do in this world is in this particular book. So
Mhm.
why even indulge in stepping out of my way and doing just
Mm.
taking the responsibility in that sense, because everything I have is in this particular book. So how can
Mm.
we then approach that particular scenario? Because I see a lot of that happening. I mean, like the party in power is almost a representation of that to some extent.
So then we are indulging in a larger question of how we have dealt with education largely. How have we dealt with understanding our beliefs through books, through reading widely? Is this a popular belief? Is this something, or is this something that can be elitist? So the question then becomes that, are we trying to civilize people? Again, are we trying to tell people that by reading widely, you're going to become more, you're going to have larger ideas, you're going to have a wider horizon to explore. But then again, this is not a problem of a specific case scenario of a particular community of people sitting somewhere in India trying to tell them that this is a text that you shouldn't be reading. This goes back to our very roots of education. Have we given importance to reading even beyond our academic books in school?
Yeah.
Or, in CBSE, have we tried to ever argue with what is being taught to us? And have we written in the exam paper, I don't believe this, because the moment you write that, you're going to be scored badly on it. So it's a question of education then. Are we even thinking about that with ourselves? And then we can go ahead and try talking about, the society, and you shouldn't read this, or you should read this also.
Yeah, and if we are talking about thing, I think it's not only about, let's say, people who subscribe to one particular way of thinking, but that's pretty much the same way if you look at social media and people who we would consider woke or progressive in that sense, and this whole aspect of cancel culture that's come about. So
Mhm.
I think it's very similar to the way the discussion we're having right now um of they're almost possessed with this ideology that their way of looking at the world is the right way of looking at the world.
Mhm.
And like, I mean, I wouldn't say what's right and wrong in society, but then at least I don't know to what extent that's beneficial for society
Mhm.
on a larger scale. Like, I understand someone may have thoughts that are very close to them, and let's say books that are very close to them, but to say that they wouldn't indulge in the opinion of another one because they feel that's infringing on theirs, that's where we come into, let's say, muddy waters.
Yeah, perhaps. And then I think there will be a distinction drawn between whether they are indulging and then not accepting, or whether they are completely averse to indulging. And that is something that even I have an issue with, not indulging at all, which is
Yeah,
because,
yeah, yeah.
because again, if you don't indulge, then yeah, you're not only doing your community a disservice, you're doing yourself a disservice, because you're not, again, even if you're criticizing something then, and you don't know about it, and you haven't indulged in the writings or in the ideas of the one you criticize, then yeah, that's major disservice. So yes, indulging and then forming an opinion subsequently, and not indulging at all. So not indulging at all is something that I definitely have a problem with too. But the former, indulging
Hmm.
and then having an opinion, that opinion can be anything, then that's
Yeah,
your right or
that's
wrong.
yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
So yeah, but then it can be something as simple as, let's say, if even if you've read the book, or let's
Mhm.
say a book that's close to the opposition's ideology or the way of thinking, and
Mhm.
and then you've drawn your interpretations from that. But if you don't, at least this is my opinion, at least if you aren't open to a conversation with that
Mhm.
individual, even then, because the things you've drawn out of that text or the things you've drawn out of their perceived ideology or their perceived way
Hmm.
of thinking may not be their actual way of thinking as well, right?
Right, right, yeah. But again, the idea of conversing and the idea of engaging in debates, this does stem from the privilege that you and I have been accorded
Of
in the
course, of
society,
course. Yeah, yeah.
and then putting anybody on that pedestal of engaging with me in an argument, that is going to come off as a little elitist from our end. And unless it's you and I, we are sitting here, we have access to this amount of education, we have been to school, we have these books at our disposal, we are sitting on Skype, then I'm definitely going to have this conversation with you. But then you also need to take into account the cultural background, the
Of
the
course.
person you are engaging with. So then again, this is a question that is depends from person to person.
Wait, so like I didn't quite understand the way you're thinking. Obviously, I understand that that some people are more privileged in society than others, and some have other
Mhm.
resources and things like that. Like, but then how does that come about when we are looking at when we are simply having a discussion about a particular topic? Obviously, some of them have different presuppositions, so some of them start at different axioms than others. But like, I'm still trying to grapple my head around this.
So this is not a question about s- um, privilege on a sort of in a sense of ideas, privilege of knowing ideas or being acquainted with ideas. This is more about privilege of access. So if you
Hmm.
are having a conversation with somebody who does not have even the primary access, so you've given them, so okay, so you've given them a tool that
Hmm.
I want you to read this book. I know you believe in this, but I want you to read this book. Now, depending on the way in which this person has been taught, depending on the way this person has seen education in his life or hasn't seen education, depending on the way that person can even read this book or not, and will be taught by somebody else, that's how they're going to interpret that book.
Yeah.
They won't possibly have other sources to sort of supplement their understanding. They possibly won't have the privilege to access other sources to do that in the same place. And then the idea of academic interpretation, how you interpret, so how they interpret that text or how we interpret that text, will also become entirely different because you've just given them a tool.
Hmm.
If they don't have the same access to the techniques that we do, the techniques of even very simple things like just engaging in a debate, if you don't even have the concept of a debate introduced to this person you're talking to, then of course you're coming from a place of privilege because that person doesn't even know what a debate is. So the tool is there, but the technique is not there, and when the techniques are missing, that's a question of then privilege and
But then
how can
how would you say that we could then have an open conversation with them and understanding their upbringing, however difficult that might be, or the cultural bias, the cognitive bias that they may have in the topics they approach, in the way of thinking they have. Then how do you feel that it would be almost fair to have a conversation that that takes into account several of these things that we've just pointed out?
Right. So again, this comes to sort of integrating the idea of conversations in our culture. This comes to, so we always talk about ideas like spread awareness about education, spread awareness about educating the girl child. But when you the hypocrisy of these things is that you are writing educate the girl child largely in a village on a sort of on the back of a toilet wall, very large in English, large words there. That's the moment again you're creating this space of, going in a village and you're spreading awareness. Who is this awareness being spread to? So the question then, it's then, then I'm going in very prime. I'm going to like square one. I'm not
Hmm.
going
Hmm.
to this philosophical engagement with a person. I'm going to the very basics
Hmm.
of not only conversing about something, but integrating the idea of a conversation, that
Hmm.
conversations can lead to different conclusions. This is not to dismiss or say that conversations don't happen in societies that we're taking into account of questions, and that too will be homogenizing a society. But of course, given the backgrounds of people coming from urban societies or rural societies, the idea of the very definition of a conversation would be very different. Sometimes the definition of a conversation, that this conversation is being decided by somebody who we accord respect in the society according to their age. Whatever this person, this male, this 80-year-old male says, no matter if he's educated or not, whatever he says is law.
Hmm.
It's what we believe it is. Then in front of that, you bring any book. That book is not that 80-year-old male, and
Hmm.
that's the question that then you need to first the basics you need to deal with, and then we can have a
But
conversation, I
then
guess.
that's touching very much to this aspect of human nature itself. Like,
Hmm.
so, uh, I mean, sorry for the books I'm sort of reading right now. It's like
Yeah.
the Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, and it talks been obsessing about Hitler and Stalin, and this aspect of good and evil in the world, really, and trying to understand that. And so,
Mm-hmm.
what I've gathered from my reading of Hitler is that, and I think it's very much prominent in psychological studies that have been done. And just wait for me for a second, like I'm trying to break this down for you. So it's this aspect that if you've been doctrinated with a chain of thought almost from the very beginning, from let's say, you've been possessed to say that this is the only way of thinking, and then when there's an individual, someone like a Hitler, who comes about and says something very affluently, something very well, he's very well with the way he communicates, and he has a very strong hold on that particular ideology. You almost It almost becomes second nature to react on something. So, and there are several studies done, and it's because it's coming from this essence of authority. um there are studies done in psychological labs which look at, so there was this particular study I'm referring to where there were two patients, so one patient and his friend who'd gone into a psychologist's lab, and the psychologist had was giving orders to this friend of the patient and telling him that press this shock button when I tell you to. And then this obviously the patient was sitting on the thing and he had shock receptors all over his hands and whatnot. And just through um, just through the orders of this particular authority, let's say, of a psychologist, he almost didn't even think about the measures he was
Mm-hmm.
taking, and was clicking on the shock receptors because almost of this authority that was spanning down. I mean, I'm going
Mm-hmm.
on tangents and I've probably forgotten where I started off, but with the
And
question I had in mind. But yeah, it's this I like obviously, like, ideology is everywhere. It's really hard to remove some sort of bias from everything that we have. But yeah, man, that's something I really I've been thinking about, and I don't know how to grapple my. Is this something you think about? Have you given this much thought?
right, the question, and
There isn't
I
particular
have given.
question, it's just rambled thoughts.
Yeah, I have given the idea of, authority thought, though, that
Oh yeah,
a
it
lot
was
of
it
the
wasn't regarding, it was in relation to your aspect of if
80-year-old
an
male.
80-year-old man gives
Okay.
an,
Yeah, yeah,
like,
yeah.
almost it's almost human nature after a point, like it's,
Sanctioned.
yeah.
Right. So that question of, and it also comes with this idea that, if somebody of who we accord, respect to because of their, authority, there will automatically be created a layer of protection around us. We would think about the fact that because it's coming from this space, then
Hmm.
there is protection because this person, because with authority comes power. And when you've been accorded power, then you immediately think about the fact that you just sanction this. You can do whatever that what has been said, and there is this unwritten sort of, there is this unsigned document somewhere that you are going to be protected no matter what the consequence comes out to be. Because in those moments, like for example, this 80-year-old male, for example, this person might not only be an 80-year-old male, but perhaps the head of this
Hmm.
society, right? This
Hmm.
little society. And as the head, they are constantly thinking, no matter what the problem, this is the person we go to. So for them, if an external force comes in, a person like, you and I out of a Skype call reach there saying, do this, they can beat us up, and then they'll go to the authority, their authority, who they think in that region holds the most power. And what you said also made me think about, there was this another experiment that was done, where there was this cat in cage, and the woman was told that, if you like, not press the button to shock the cat and subsequently killing the cat, if you don't press it in 1 minute, then you're going to be given this sum of money. If you press it, then you're going to lose that sum of money.
Hmm.
um, and there was this sort of so you have those things that you want to do what you're not supposed to do,
Hmm.
those urges, um, and when you know that the concept. So why am I linking these two things is because in that situation too, the consequence, she was already told what the consequence was going to be, that killing that cat is simply not going to give her the sum of money, and she was fine with that. And she ended up killing the cat, though she got no money. But she had that urge to do what is supposed to not be done. And when that sort of layer of protection gets created, be it from a source of authority or be it from your own senses that, right now I'm going to be protected no matter what the consequences, then I guess, yeah, people begin to give in to these authoritative ideas and, yeah, forming
Yeah,
their
it's. I
beliefs.
think. I think you've touched upon a brilliant point there. It's that. And I think it's something so fundamental about human nature, and it's very difficult for I think the both of us to comment here because I don't think the both of us have ever been in that sort of position. It's this essence that if you are almost so powerful, like let's say a prime minister of a country or president of a country or CEO of a major organization which runs data or runs let's say electricity in a particular country, then you may start thinking that you can actually get away with things and you
Mhm.
can actually start thinking that or let's say controlling the media and controlling the way people think even which is so yeah it's so scary it's beyond my perception really that's what fascinates me so much that of how yeah it's that people in power can actually and how power corrupts in that sense. Yeah, I think there's a brilliant quote that several historians say that absolute power corrupts absolutely. So yeah, it's it's
That reminds me of this quote. It won't be correct, so I'll paraphrase. History is littered with the ruins of empires that thought they were eternal. And
oh
that's,
yeah, yeah.
the very fact that each empire, each king, almost every king in popular culture, popular imagination has come in all of these inscriptions. This king is going to rule forever. This king is going to be an, these ideas you find throughout. And somehow, no matter how much we say that you have to learn from history, I think we never will. We will
Yeah,
continue to do
yeah.
what we want to
So,
do.
and that's so fascinating because if you look at you as you just raised the point, I started thinking about the Roman civilizations, the Greek
Mm-hmm.
civilization, the Egyptian civilizations, all the civilizations we hold to some, let's say, prestige in that sense of how great they were. Like
Mm-hmm.
they almost felt, as you were saying, that they are invincible and that nothing can happen to them. And then
Right.
suddenly they start, like the Greeks went so far, and I think we are currently doing it in society that they started talking about what's it called? Transhumanism or almost
Mm-hmm.
transcending biology in that sense.
Right.
I don't know, maybe we disagree here, but then I see aspects of that in current society of how we start questioning the fundamental things that have almost got us here. Questioning
Mm-hmm.
fundamental science, fundamental things like that, which yeah, that's
Yeah.
yeah, that's so powerful.
Exactly. Yeah. So, yeah, every age, has something that's very distinct, but it also every age has something that you can constantly find, you can almost always find familiarity, which then breaks that notion of, superiority and inferiority. Like, even if like you think about, so one of the things that I'm constantly aggravated and, by, and something that infuriates me so much is the lack of importance given to Hindi or or Hindi, Sanskrit,
Oh yeah, Sanskrit's a
literature
big one.
in,
Yeah.
or even South Indian languages. वो तो
Hmm.
चलो वो तो nobody talks about most of these um, poems from medieval India. Bhakti, there was a Bhakti movement, right, in the medieval phases of India, starting from your 6th, 7th centuries, where there was this intense devotion, this path of bhakti marg of creating this love almost between a bhakta and a chosen deity. So
Hmm.
you have this love between Vishnu, between the devotee and Vishnu, or between Shiva and the devotee. And the poems, they're so brilliant, they're written so well, the way in which the emotions are articulated, the way in which it's linked almost to not only one's emotions, but that philosophical idea of how you can unite with this transcendental god, with this
Yeah,
god that
yeah, yeah.
these are ideas that have existed. Okay, so a very interesting thing. There's this book by Manu Pillai, the Courtesan, the Mahatma, and the Italian Brahmin.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
wanted to
I
get to
did a
that as well.
review of
Yeah.
that a few days ago. So in this book, there's this story of this king who wrote a parody, of his time. Now you think about parodies. Bart Baker has died almost. He's no longer a part of this parody circle. But you associate certain ideas with, oh, this has happened right now, modernity, satire. But haven't we heard of satire going back, like have satirical texts of the Middle Ages in Europe, or even
Mm.
ancient Sanskrit treaties, and coming down to texts in the Mughal period too. So things have always existed. Familiar ideas have existed throughout ages, and that's why I talk about history. Just being, you should open up a canvas and throw around ideas, and then connect these dots. So, yeah, that.
There are so many things to unpick here. Like, I think something I took away from that was that when you were talking about these several different languages that there, like in numerous amounts of languages that there in India. Okay, and then something that really touched me was Sanskrit, and I didn't really know about this until recently. I was listening to this conversation that Amish Tripathi, like a famous Indian historian, was having, and he was talking about this essence that the amount of Sanskrit texts that have been encrypted and are actually there for us to actually read and understand are so few that if we actually start encrypting that, there's so much actually we can learn from those things. I mean, there is, and he even went so far to say that if you actually want to understand Sanskrit, you're better off studying it abroad than you are studying it in India itself, because there simply aren't enough good institutions or good places to learn Sanskrit in that sense. And I think, as you were talking about those transcendental things, I think that's fundamental. I think it takes us back to this question of morality in that sense. And however much we may question religion in that sense, I don't think atheistic morality will be able to serve us on a societal wide basis.
Mhm.
And and I think that's fundamental. So do you have any idea about the whole aspect that Amish Tripathi is talking about with the Sanskrit texts, and some of them being encrypted, some of them haven't, and even the ones that have been encrypted, there's only so much we can do them because yeah.
So on the question of languages, I haven't engaged with much, but one thing I'd like to correct you on: Amish Tripathi is not a historian; he's a
He's a
writer.
writer. Okay,
Yeah,
fair enough. See,
uh,
as I
yeah,
said, I
yeah, yeah. Like I just get a little taken aback
yeah,
all of a sudden.
exactly, and that's why I have people like you here, so you can
Yeah,
correct me with all the
right. Yeah. So, but the point that he raises, which I haven't heard of, from like I didn't know he had raised this point about Sanskrit should be, you have to go, you should go outside if you want more engagement with Sanskrit. Um, Perhaps might be true. I don't know much, but I do know that even in the way in which schools function, and I'm going to talk about North India only,
Hmm.
because I don't feel like, first of all, the question of language is again too sensitive, because we can't sit here and impose, right, the importance of a particular language, because I
Of course,
definitely
of
see,
course.
yeah,
That's why I posed the question that what do you think
mm,
about Sanskrit as this question? Like I
yeah,
didn't even get into South Indian languages
exactly.
because I'm not so literate enough to
Mm,
even comment there.
right. So just Sanskrit, and somebody who's interested in Sanskrit and who wants to deal with, learning the subject. Um, as far as my education goes and how I was taught through, I grew up in a CBSE system, and but I had to change a lot of schools because my dad's in the Air Force, so constantly, going from one place to another. But the way in which Sanskrit was taught to me too, even till I guess eighth, or I don't know if there was an option in 10th or something. I did it till eighth, but it did feel like even till then you were just doing the ABCDs, that you are
Hmm.
not engaging with, complicated texts, with the poetic sort of expression in that exists in Sanskrit. Yeah, I guess there is this underrated. Sanskrit is definitely the way in which the literature is also perceived underrated. Most of the people who have read texts of Sanskrit have been translations, English translations, be it
Hmm.
the, that's talking about young scholars, young people with the subject. So yeah, there is a sort of there's not enough importance given to Sanskrit. But and a very interesting thing though is that the Orientalists of the British Raj, those who romanticized everything um, Indian, especially Sanskrit, they were fascinated. They were, they would constantly talk about how, so Shakuntala, the text by
Oh
Kalidasa,
yeah, yeah.
um, there was this, William Jones is considered to make it to have it made so popular that India became Shakuntala in the perception of a lot of people for a while, because of the translations happening in English and the way in which Sanskrit was supposed to be this motherly language, and the way in which the expressions are done are just so beautiful. And so yeah, there have been phases when there has been good engagement, but throughout time and how we have come now, there is of course not enough, so we can do
Mm.
something about
Yeah, it's like, because I've been going into this rabbit hole, and some of the things I've discovered is just so fascinating that
that.
like, I didn't know that the Fibonacci sequence, that the person who came up with the Fibonacci sequence, he actually, in the book that he put forward, I'm forgetting the name of the book, he said that he took inspiration from Indian scholars, and their Sanskrit works,
Mhm.
and when you actually dig deep into the scholars of the Sanskrit texts that who have written, so I'm by no means I'm fluent in Sanskrit, but like the English translations that I've read, they've put forward that in everything they've written, it's not almost that they've come up with these theories, but it's something that's come to them almost. And it's
Right.
it's is the question that we were talking about earlier. But yeah, there's so many things to uncover, like things like psychedelics even, and that's a hotly
Mhm.
debated topic in Western societies and in our society as well. But aspects such as soma, which is talked about to possess this transcendental space that people go into. But yeah, there's so many things, and I feel we'd be doing a disservice if we actually didn't uncover some of these texts and what they have to say.
Yeah, so texts on a large number have been uncovered. Engagement is where we are losing track. But
But even
yeah.
even even when we are talking about the translation, like, how obviously everyone understands it, so when we translate something, there's so much that's lost. But like, that's another thing I want to sort of understand, that like, even with our understanding through Hindi translations, through English or whatever, Persian even, to some text,
Mhm.
like, how much of how much of it's actually substantial, and actually what the original scholars were wanting to put forward.
Yeah. Well, for that, I need to have read the original texts. And that's the frustration, that's the major frustration that, and this is not only with, this is a frustration that I have with all the texts I read, because I
Mm.
just go into reading every text with this thing that I won't believe this. I can't believe this. And there's just this idea that's going to give me a lot of crisis, but I just go in like, I can't, which has made me a very sort of very critical towards everything I read or hear, a problem that I need to sort. But with the idea of, so what I have gathered from, whenever I've read the Valmiki Ramayana's English translation, right? Um, and after I finished it, I went to this online website that's, I don't know if it's created by IIT or some website. There was where they had recorded Sanskrit, translations
Versus.
of verses
Okay.
from the Ramayana, and I was hearing that, and just the way it's the oration, the emphasis, the poetic emphasis, the expression, you realize then that the poetic, the music of a text,
Hmm.
that cannot be translated
And
to
maybe there
another.
is some, and I'm not trying to act stupid here, but maybe there is something to that, like in the way the texts have been almost
Mhm.
structured. Maybe there's something deeper to that, that maybe it's supposed to be in that way, and when we are translating it in English or
Mhm.
whatever, that essence is lost of, let's say,
Yeah.
how thoughts are channeled almost through verses, and maybe the poetry in the verses is what they're trying to put forward, maybe.
Right. Vidya Dehejiya, she is a fabulous art historian, and she has translated a number of bhakti poems to English. And she has talked about this in several cases, and especially she went live a few months ago on JLF, Jaipur Literature Festival,
Oh,
was
okay.
doing this
Yeah,
online
yeah.
series. And I was covering that for her, and she said this thing that, I have done my best translating these to English, but I know that the music is lost. I know for a
Mm.
fact that the very essence that it is, that's preserved in the southern sort of, the poetics of that southern language, that's completely lost in English. No matter how beautiful you think this English,
Yeah.
and there's this frustration of I've been seeing a lot of these videos of how English sounds to non
Oh
English
yeah,
speakers.
yeah, yeah,
It's so frustrating, and it's almost like that when you
yeah.
listen to an English translation, you're like, wow, I love that, but you realize, wait, this is a translation, so obviously the original is
Arey,
going to be.
it's much more than that. Like even in English, there's so many different
Mhm.
dialects. So if you speak, I listen to a lot of Americans, and then when Americans they say they have to speak to English people or something like that, and when they hear them speak English, it appears to be a foreign language to them because it's not in their general realm of conversation that they have with people.
Yeah,
So it's so fascinating.
accents, definitely,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
pension becoming pension, so things like that, what are you saying sometimes becomes the question, even when, like, you were saying a sentence like, why are you like this, be it depending on where you go and how
Oh
you
yeah.
pronounce it's going to completely alter what they're thinking. Even and then, yeah, this has prompted me to, you know emphasis on each word.
Hmm.
Why are you like this? Why are you like this? So, that also changes. So perhaps in translation, this emphasis also gets lost somewhere, and that's
Oh,
frustrating.
definitely. Yeah. I was listening to someone and they were talking about Christianity in that sense.
Mhm.
And I'm not too sure about what's the original language, if you want to call it, or the original verse in which Christianity was written. And they were even talking about the same conversation we're having right now of
Mm.
even when you translate, I'm not sure what it is. So is it whatever the language was, and when you translate it into English or Persian or whatnot, there is still so much that gets lost, like as we were talking about that. And it's those emphasis on words, because if it's something that's written to almost base your life on, then maybe every word is essential in that sense, right? And
So
maybe
Hebrew
every,
and Aramaic are the
yeah,
languages you are talking
Hebrew,
about.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and the later, and yeah, so basically, in the middle, when do you know about the Reformation?
No.
So Reformation was basically the movement that took place in the Middle Ages, which was to sort of protest. Have you seen Elizabeth?
Hmm.
Um, so she is supposedly this Protestant queen. This is
Yeah,
that's Protestantism versus Roman,
yeah.
the Roman Church. And what happened during this time, which from what you're talking about the translations, from Hebrew and such languages of the Old Testament, what had been popularized after Rome was Latin, and writing these texts and knowing these texts in Latin. So the authority was possessed by. So Latin was a language of, the elite of the of the priests, of those who were preachers of the Roman Catholic Church. Roman Catholic Church had a huge influence on this entire on Europe,
Hmm.
and so the it became very inaccessible to people because only a few people had the knowledge of Latin, and they used to sort of go ahead and they used to propagate the message of the Christ. But as a number of reformers, Reformation, when it began, they began to also use language as a tool of going against established norms. Martin Luther translated the not the Martin Luther of the later ages,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
original one, the OG. He translated it into German, and uh, when he began translating this, he was one of the reasons why Germany became so economically, well off, because everybody was buying this German translation. They could now read the text on their own and then make their own understanding of it.
Wow.
So it's also used as a tool of perhaps reform and understanding things differently.
Oh, definitely. And something I talk about often, and it was something I came across and I found shocking. Really, it's that in the Arabic countries, in the countries in the Middle East, so I think most of the texts, there's such a large majority of texts in the world are written in English, right? Like there's so many English intellectuals, and even intellectuals in different fields who like to write in English. And
Mhm.
there are so many important concepts that some of these English intellectuals write, or intellectuals write about in English, and these these sorry, the countries in the Middle East don't get possession to them because of this English, because of English in that sense. And the resources they're made available to them is in their home, is in their native language. And aspects such as what progressives in the modern day talk about, let's say homosexuality, the LGBTQ community. There's so many of these things that we're talking about in modern society today, that, let's say, some of these English texts talk about, that are simply not made available to, let's say, some of the countries that are in question. And this could not only be the Middle Eastern countries, because this is something I've looked into, but could be anything really. Could be China, could be the Chinese, could be the Indonesians, who may be more in tune with their language, and as a result, not understand where society is even progressing, if that makes sense.
Right. Of course, language again is a tool which is used to make things accessible to you, right? So language is primarily what? Me communicating anything to you, but also something that's of relevance, that's going to bring some productivity to your life, my life, which is going to bring about some new ideas. And when, thanks to the colonial encounter and thanks to how the world has been fashioned, English has been put on this pedestal of something that in which most of the engagements of progression or sort of uh, any of the ideas that you just stated are going to be talked about, and then it becomes inaccessible. Sometimes these also overshadow, though, sometimes not only accessibility, but like, for example, Marathi texts or some texts in India which have talked about, Stri Purush Tulana, for example. There was this text about, um, this woman who, I think, this was the text in which the roles of a male of men and women were reversed.
Okay.
uh, so these are also, so at the, because of language and the space it occupies in politics, not only do ideas become inaccessible, but also ideas get overshadowed, and we somehow never hear of them, because not only are we not giving them access to English, but also we are not giving them access to a translation to English and then wider circulation. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Right.
it's so important. What are your thoughts on the new age in the which we consume information really? So I'm a big fan of podcasts and audiobooks. I read a lot as well, but just the essence that when I'm on the commute, when I'm just doing menial jobs around the house, let's say washing dishes or doing something like that, I can simply listen to a podcast, listen to an audiobook, and that's so much more valuable than what I would have been doing in that particular time.
Right.
Do you have any particular thoughts in the way we're sort of consuming information now? Of how YouTube, even, it's not only simply cat videos, but even deep conversations are happening, and there are millions of people who are coming in to watch. So yeah, what
Yeah.
are your thoughts on the new media?
So, with the idea of doing things simultaneously, like that you can consume while you are perhaps washing dishes, it's something that has really saved a lot of time, first of all, because you are not having to sit down at a study. You can work out and you can complete an
Oh yeah,
entire book.
yeah.
So of course, in terms of productivity and time, this is something that's definitely phenomenal. But I also link a lot of audio medias to just oral stories. I also think that so this whole idea of a podcast, so not of a podcast, perhaps of an audiobook. Audiobooks are somehow this sort of replacement of your parents or grandparents reading a story to you before you go to sleep. Sometimes now you just have to say, Alexa, read this bedtime story to her, and she reads the story. So of course, while we are engaging with these new age technologies and are finding it to be very beneficial, we are also now perhaps walking into an age where we are disconnected physically much more. Now we have to be, but also because we are primarily just forming a contact and with new age technology. So and with audiobooks, though I really love the idea, because sometimes I don't want to read a book, I also think that at the cost of at their cost, a lot of hard paperback industries are suffering, though I'm pretty sure that books will never go out of vogue.
Yeah,
That's an
yeah.
idea that I want to believe. But of course, like, my interest in books began because of Diary of a Wimpy Kid, and I can never listen to an audiobook, because I also think that the essence of these books might somehow get lost
Oh
in an
yeah, for sure,
audiobook.
for sure, for sure.
That experience of reading and reading it in your own voice, in in contrast to listening through somebody else, the interest might just I think about it. If I hear Diary of a Wimpy Kid, would I like it as much as I liked it when I did then? There are of course both pros and cons, but yeah, on the larger context of for people like us who need to engage with other things productively and rationally, we are saving a lot of time. So
Definitely, and I still find there's still room for reading, and I enjoy reading myself. I put time out for that, and I feel that when you are engaging in a book, just sitting down and engaging in a book, that it's you are just more, you're just able to connect with it much more than you are simply if you are reading listening to an audiobook. Not that that's not useful, but
hmm.
yeah, I think there is room for both things in that sense. But you were saying, you know what? I actually just found out like a couple of days back that are you based in Delhi, or are
Yeah, yeah.
you? Oh, because I'm from Gurgaon as well, so
I
I'll
mean,
be
oh
coming
wait,
back.
I consider Delhi. I mean, I consider I am in Gurgaon only. Yeah,
Acha, okay.
yeah,
Oh, that's
yeah.
great because I live in Gurgaon. I'm coming back. So, and I didn't know. Otherwise, I could have just postponed this conversation to be something in person. Do you know what? So yeah, we might, if you'd be open to it, we could do this sometime again in person. But there's still so many conversations I want to have over
Yeah.
here.
You live in
So
Gurgaon, definitely. Yes.
yeah. So I listened to you, I watched your book review rather on the Courtesan, the Mahatma, and the Italian Brahmin, and I would just like to get your takes on it because I really find the author fascinating. I don't want to spell out his name because I'm probably shall butcher it, but yeah,
Manu Pillai.
yeah,
That's
Manu
yeah.
Pillai, yeah, yeah,
Yes.
yeah. What were your
Right.
takeaways from that?
So on that review, I could only do the one thing about this new age thing that I found out, and I had to take it took me a lot of time to realize this, that when I started Instagram last year, and what I was doing was I was just writing these really long posts with these really very bad visuals accompanying it. And I was thinking, then why am I not getting engagement? And so over time, I've started to realize that what this new age demands is a very quick sort of look at things and a very rapid summary of whatever you are doing. So I'm glad you asked me this because I very rapidly covered some areas of the book,
Hmm.
which
Hmm.
but I gave like a broad overview of what you might find in this book. So yeah, this book, why I called it a starting point to engage with things that you might, so black and white narratives that we have of the past, right? That the idea of sort of putting things in these rigid boundaries, um, that gets broken through this book. So there's a chapter called "What If the Mahatma Had Lived," and it's so interesting because it really made me question whether that assassination did lead, though this is not to say that Gandhi's philosophy was not widespread, that his ideas were not being communicated with, that he was not a figure who was engaging widely, not only in our own country, but also with Africa prior to him coming here
Oh
and all
yeah,
of that.
yeah.
There was wider engagement. He
Oh,
was known.
everywhere.
Yeah.
Like I think he was one of the first pop stars in that sense because I'm actually reading something on Jim Jones. He's this American preacher, and in the 60s, and because I think Gandhi was one of the first people.
Mm.
I think radio was the only sort of information that allowed people to know about things in the other side of the world, really. And I think the
Mhm.
BBC did a lot of work in that sense of how they propagated ideas that were happening in, let's say, India and the other world. But yeah, go
Yeah.
on. I don't want to break your thought.
A lot of videos, still survive. Gandhi
Oh
comes
yeah,
to,
yeah.
have you seen those? He comes and the
Wait, have you seen the
just
Richard Attenborough movie on Gandhi? Where
yes,
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
he has
yeah.
some clips there, doesn't he? Yeah.
Yeah. So just yeah. So of course he was definitely a very popular person. There's no denying that. But the question largely was that if he had survived, if he had not been assassinated, if he had perhaps lived to uh, till let's even say the 90s of 60s coming into 70s perhaps max, um, then would he have become an international problem? Somebody who's constantly fasting, he's just not agreeing with, because we do know, no matter how much he was completely averse to the idea of a modern civilization, what how he captured it. He was absolutely averse to rapid industrialization. He was averse to the idea of complete independent Swaraj, which is only political and economic. He wanted this sort of what he was ideating at that time, that, I want you to spiritually know yourself. I want you to engage. I want you to get inner freedom, because if you get inner freedom, then there's British, the Raj can exist or not, you already have freedom. What he was talking about, he was always so frustrated with his, why he wrote this book called Hind Swaraj, and
Hmm.
he said before writing that I was going mad with, he didn't say that, but I'm just trying to make this a relation, that I was going mad with so many ideas I had in my mind that I had to write all of them down, and he quickly wrote down that book, and it became, Hind Swaraj became popular that way. So the question then becomes that if you have a man like this, uh, you know there's this biographer called Fisher, who a contemporary biographer, who writes in his introduction that Gandhi was upsetting the world. So if you have a man like this upsetting the world, then he is assassinated. So you have now the ability to just romanticize his ideas. Be it you act on it or not, the man's gone. He wanted to act on it, now that's not your burden. You are going to rapidly industrialize. And that's what happened. We industrialized. We did those things which Gandhi would have not been completely okay with. And in the light of that, if he had managed to survive, would we have accorded him the status of a Mahatma towering over a
Hmm.
nation, or a thinker of an orphaned philosophy? One time lawyer, one time a freedom fighter, and one time thinker of an orphaned philosophy. So this book that Pillai has written, it has 60 essays, and each essay sort of has these characters who trespass these notions that we attach to them. The courtesan is supposed to be this way. A courtesan can't be educated. She can't write books. That she's supposed to be a sort of submissive figure. That queens are supposed to be the secondary characters in conversations with kings who are the primary characters. You have figures who are constantly trespassing these norms. And why this book is relevant is because Manu does that thing where he establishes a link, but he speaks in the book. It's not a dead narration of the past. It's very active. He's active in it himself. And because he is constantly commenting, and he is make intervening to make his own remarks, you are able to hear his voice, and you are able to then establish links between the past and the present. So this book is brilliant for that. And I think anybody who is even, and this is also not something that's going to have a lot of academic jargon. It's
Hmm.
very easy, and each essay is, Edgar Allan Poe had this philosophy
Yeah.
that each essay needs to be short enough that it can be absorbed in one reading, and each word should contribute. And I think Pillai does that. So yeah, that's what I think of the book.
Would pose a great character in itself, and I'll have to talk about him.
I
But
love him.
but
Yeah.
just focusing on Gandhi for a moment. Not that that's a
Mhm.
small topic, but
Just Gandhi, yes.
but but this aspect, that don't you feel, as you were pointing out, and I think I'm just sort of paraphrasing here, that we revere him in that sense because he died for a cause almost, or because almost that it depicted that if you are trying to, if you are working towards something that's almost bigger than you, bigger, and it's for society as a whole, a sacrifice is probably what's needed. And I don't know, like, this is also a concept that's propagated in Christianity, which says that when you talk about human sacrifice or animal sacrifice, some people take it literally, but what the essence to that is basically that when someone like Gandhi, and I think I can find parallels to Jesus, I'm not making any derogatory comments here, but it's this aspect that why would someone say that Jesus had to take, let's say, the burden, but you almost have to have that one individual who springs up and takes the burden of that society, and it almost requires a sacrifice for that ideology to live on, basically, if that makes sense.
Right. If sacrifices, that sacrifices immortalize people,
Right, right.
yeah. So with Gandhi too, though I wouldn't say at all that, because this is of course fashioning an alternative history, and I can't be certain there too. Neither can Pillai be that, certain that he wouldn't have become
Of
what we
course,
think
of
of.
course, of course.
But because you are seeing this, as you've already said, that he was known in his time too. He was known, in other philosophers' texts, contemporary texts. He was criticized by Tagore. He was
Oh yeah,
he taught criticism.
majorly, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. a lot of things. But the larger question is whether retelling things that are, almost very emotionally moving. When you imagine this man wrapped in khadi clothes, very lean, and you imagine this figure of this man, walking to, to pick up salt, and you think about this actually happening, that this has not just happened in a comic, or this has not happened in a fictional sort of, movie, that this happened, that this man walked and, he was going around telling people all about how you should spin a charka. And then you imagine this very lean man, who'd been so misunderstood, perhaps, not only then, today, throughout his life. Then he's suddenly assassinated. And you have this entire imagination of him being assassinated a certain way and then him saying a certain thing and passing away. That does put so much weight on a figure that it's, I think, definitely adds to, that person being immortalized. So,
Let's
yes.
touch upon this aspect that what would have happened if he lived on. I
Mhm.
think I think as you're saying, maybe the things you're saying is probably would have fashioned out, because if you look at, as you're saying, his later life, he
Mhm.
almost moved away from the luxuries and wanted to live on bare necessities, because almost of this essence that he wanted to, as you're saying, the spiritual path he was probably taking, but not but also because he wanted to say that, if I want to stand for the people or represent the people, I have to go to, uh,
Mhm.
the
I get.
bare minimum of people. So maybe, what will the untouchables be able to represent my, with me? If so, maybe yes, because if I'm only wearing clothes that I make myself and eating food that I grow on my own land, maybe yes. So, like, maybe it's probably true that what you're actually seeing and what actually Pillai is propagating here would have been true, that
Mm.
if he did live on. So yeah.
Yeah, but the idea of, living, so he had not, this was not only post-independence, the
And
idea
this
of
is
living.
contrary, and this is
Mm.
contrary to where he started off, wasn't it? Because he started off as a very affluent lawyer, going to school in the
Right.
UK and reading Tolstoy, which he still, I think, was his major influence. But
Yeah,
yeah.
Tolstoy was a major influence. So one of the most fascinating things I find about his texts is the sources, is
Oh
the,
yeah.
but that's going off on a tangent. With
Feel
Gandhi,
free. There's no structure here.
yeah, but we must address the idea, because I do find the question of alternative history is very fascinating. What if
Yeah,
he had lived? Now,
of course.
the idea of him being, he wanted to live, he was living how he wanted to live, though. He wanted to live the life of a very simple man. And this was not something that happened only after independence. This was throughout the struggle for Indian independence, right? You think about his representation in Africa and going there, of course, you see images of him in coat and pant and everything. You read his
Hmm.
autobiography, you see how he, the experiments with truth. You see the evolution of a man who's now slowly becoming more drawn towards the spiritual. But the question becomes, in an age of extremists and in the age of moderates, when you have a man who is saying that, so he was propagating, he was claiming that, the reason the British rule us is not because they have a lot of power. The reason they rule is because you guys gave into the temptations of the British silver, that you guys are letting them, and now you have become inferior you've
Yeah.
become inferior inside. So till the time you don't arm yourself up with non-violence, but arm yourself with, this sort of idea of the British and their laws perhaps not align, if their laws don't align with you, if they don't align with your conscience, if you don't do that, if you don't perform those, that is the way to attain Swaraj. And the other way is to, engage with these whole spiritual ideas. The question becomes, would his relevancy cease to exist because Swaraj was attained then? And then the focus would be on attaining that sort of economic, prosperity that was imagined post independence, that was, the vision of what India was going to be, was to, rapidly then industrialize. And would that benefit people more? Because the benefit then of the, majority is usually what is taken into account. Because now that you've gotten Swaraj, does your importance as this philosophical thinker on a worldwide stage, does it cease to exist? Because his image was primarily also one of this fakir from India who was trying to get them independence. what would happen to the fakir after they had gotten independence? What would BBC talk about? That fakir is now just fasting because he's upset that the country is divided and it's rapidly industrializing. And when the fakir dies, I think Pillai, I'll just quote what he says in the book, that if Gandhi had died um, after like a natural, and he had not died because of him being assassinated, then what would have been reported in the newspaper? So, what would have been reported was Mr. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, one time barrister at law, one time freedom fighter, and neglected thinker of an orphaned philosophy, passed away yesterday. He was 125 years old and died of a shattered heart in a country he no longer recognized. So, yeah, then, that's that. So,
Yeah,
yes.
that's yeah. It's fascinating to think about. And it's not only with Gandhi, but I think it's a positive thing with Gandhi. But also how ideologies possess people. So if
Mm,
Gandhi was sort of very very possessed with this Tolstoyan ideology of non-violence and later on spirituality even, and that
mhm,
almost formed his thinking, and that's how he almost propagated this idea. It's so fascinating because I can see parallels, and obviously in a different context, like to the people who did evil to the words towards the world as well. If you look at Stalin, if you look at Hitler, they were
mhm,
more possessed by the ideology than they made towards the idea. They made alterations toward the ideology. It was the ideology that possessed them more. So if you look at
mhm,
Stalin with Marxism, if you look at Hitler with Nazism, whatever. So that's really, and it's the same concept that if we don't have open conversations then with those sorts of
mm.
people, it can become drastic.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
something I wanted to touch upon was that, and I saw this on your Instagram page, and it's this thing about the Mughals and Jahangir's obsession with European art and
Mhm.
even representing Mughal art in a
Mhm.
European style. Like, could you
Right.
expand on that? Like, what did you guys find out there?
Right. So Jahangir, as you know, a figure, has been really understood as somebody who indulged more in the realms of art and aesthetics, and somebody who, so this was a man who would go to caves or who would go to certain areas and he would want to measure everything, measure a fruit. There's a mango, let's measure it. That's a cave, let's measure that. Considered to be very much given art and aesthetics. Not to say that he was not someone who indulged in war. Of course, he wherever that was necessary, he did. But primarily, it was this engagement with more with areas that are relegated to art and aesthetics. As far as the fascination with other models are concerned, not only European models, a lot of indigenous influences can also be seen in his works. The person who deals with the area of Mughal art in our team is Shreya Gupta. So she is the one who she's fascinating with the way with her words too, and with the way in which she talks about these Mughalized versions and how ideas were Mughalized in paintings. So
Mm-hmm.
I'll actually show you. I can just share my screen
Yeah,
for
of course,
a
feel free.
sec,
I think that's
right?
better for the viewers as well.
Yes. So wait.
Does it give you an option?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So just sharing. Okay. Can you
Yep,
see
I
my
can.
screen?
Yeah. Just a second. Yep, now I can.
Right.
Oh
So
wow.
this is Emperor Jahangir who's holding the picture of Madonna. So I hope, yeah, we
Yeah, yeah.
can.
Oh wow.
Oh, yeah, see, okay, this is clearer now.
Yeah.
Right. That's too much of a zoom, but he has also not done us a great benefit in just fitting him itna sa udhar.
Uh.
So right. So you have these images that were, definitely that were made in his period, and the thing is with Jahangir's work, even the post that we did on the Mughalized angels in a landscape. So these were angels, these were images of the Bible that had come during, that had circulated the court during Akbar's time. Because Akbar was someone who really dealt a lot with engaging with different cultures and
Oh yeah,
different,
yeah, yeah.
be it the ibadat khana, be it be it how art, sort of also uh, was given such a prominent place in the court during his time. So definitely you see Jahangir uh, drawing inspiration from that. Um,
Akbar was
and
also a big fan of like Indian texts, wasn't he? Like I was reading Ira Makhuti's book on it, which is brilliant, by the way. I'd recommend it to anyone. And she talked about this essence that he almost had Mughal representations, as we're talking about with Jahangir as well, of the Ramayana, of the Mahabharata.
right,
He was obsessed with
yes.
these epics.
Yes. And the Razmanama, the Book of War,
Oh yeah.
Mahabharata, these translations were,
Oh
and
yeah, yeah.
a very interesting thing that the Mughals did was, because every religion has this orthodox, there are people who are going to be claiming, so even that what you're doing is wrong. So,
Hmm.
for example, during the Mughal period, with on the question of art, the very idea of art being made blasphemous, because first of all, you are constructing images, and you're making images, that's sort of not really, in vogue. And you are then also, what you're doing is you are doing the job of the prophet. So that
Hmm.
was, that only he can imagine, or only he can think of drawing a sort of a human figure, or so, that's not in the art of a artist to draw these, because we are just what God has made. So we are the
Yeah,
creations.
yeah,
And so
yeah.
recreate the creation of God as blasphemous. But a lot of times these Mughal emperors found ways to get around that. And they would then construct art. And during Akbar Jahangirian, the artworks that emerged from this period, you see, as you have also mentioned, these a number of images of from the Ramayana, very, very, nicely illustrated. The colors are very good. And in Jahangir's period, you see um, the presence of a lot of European influence too, not only because there were circulations of European texts during his time, but also because his father had established this legacy of
Hmm.
coming in contact. So the Bible, I think, from which the image of that angel, that Mughal angel was taken, was from a Bible that had, I think, come during Akbar's time.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, so he really did a lot of reimagination of already existing ideas, which is why I find Indian art in totality, I find absolutely fascinating, very underrated. But definitely there are certain artists and patrons that just are in a different league, and you just remember them differently. So yeah.
Just touching about Akbar because he's such a fascinating character, and the things I took away from Ira Makhuti's book was that like he was very novel for his time in the sense that, and even his evolution of his thoughts around religion as well, like so you could say he was very secular, but like if you started if you looked at his trajectory starting off, he was like respectful towards people of other faiths as well, let's say Hindus, Christians, whatever. And he said that we shouldn't undermine them just because they are misinformed of the way of reaching God, but we should still respect them. Whereas later on he
Right.
said that later on in his life he said that all religions are equally true or equally false or something like that. I'm paraphrasing here. And there was also this like a evolution towards his way of looking at life, and even yeah his fascination towards art. Like
Mhm.
you were talking about images and stuff, which is great. But even I think he brought about to the Mughal courts this aspect of storytelling. So he used to have what's it called? He used to have famous narrators, and almost he created
Right,
this
right.
theatrical this
When he used to
theater
go on
basically.
campaigns, I think that's what you're referring to. Even when he went to campaigns, he used to get a
Oh yeah,
storyteller,
yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
That's
His favorite
Courtesan.
storytellers, and yeah, even
Right.
even even so I think many of the Mughal people appreciated art in that sense, but he said that okay, you've made this art, but what's around it? Like, what was your inspiration making that? Like, that's what he used to ask these people, and almost create this sense of theater as I was putting forward. Yeah,
Yeah, dramatic expression, theatrical sort of emphasis, all of these, because art is of course not art in isolation, but also art under a patron, art made by a painter. Especially because a lot of these painters you would see coming from Iran, from other courts, especially being called to the Mughal Empire. You come here, you draw these works because again, a lot of these things, even art is become storytelling. Miniature paintings were sort of
Of
sent
course,
around
of
in the
course, of
Mughal
course.
court in a way of saying, this is, and everything being documented. Then, even ladies sitting and applying mehendi, or, just somewhere a celebration, Diwali celebrations happening. So a lot of these things were documented. But that's not only true for Mughal art. You see Rajput art, Pahari art, Kangri.
Hmm.
Everywhere you see that, like one of my favorite artists from is Manaku from Guler. He was from
Okay.
Guler, and I actually show some of his works too.
Yeah, feel free.
One of my famous work, one of his famous works that I really like is this. There's no particular reason why I like this, but I just do, and perhaps you might as well after looking at it. Right. So let me just share my screen. Okay. Can you see it now?
Just a second. Yep, I can.
Right. So this is so this is a Pahadi painting, Manuku, and he used to work on. So look at the way in which the color and the way in which these monsters emerging from this sky or this
Oh wow.
chaos, how they are just you know how they're just existing, and the fact that this painting is almost you know in action. It's if you keep looking and if you keep placing the colors in the right places
Could
and
you make
looking
it
at the
bigger? Could you
expressions.
could you expand that
Yeah,
image?
let me just, I guess it's going to, or maybe I can. Right.
Oh wow.
So if you look at this and you begin to examine the way in which each face is made, and the distinction in every
Oh,
face.
also just because
Yeah.
this is also on YouTube, but there are listeners listening in sometimes on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. So listeners,
Okay.
I'd really recommend you guys come to the YouTube channel and have a look at this because this is some great work. It's just this
Was
picture of what's the name of the Manaku? Is it the name of the artist?
Manaku of Guler Pahadi paintings. You can just
Yeah.
look at or if you don't want to come to YouTube, you can buy a book called B.N. Goswami by Go B.N.
This yeah. What is he trying?
I have no
Have you
clue.
sort?
So, but I remember just thinking, looking at this, and I said to myself, I would love that on a scarf, and I want to get that print on a shawl, and I actually am making that happen,
Oh, that's
just
great.
subtly, promoting.
Are you guys considering what's it called, stash or merchandise for
Yes.
itihasology? Well, that's
Yes,
great.
quite soon actually, because I want, as I touched upon this earlier, you have these images of Egyptian cats or Egyptian vibe. I do want to create a Harappan
Oh
vibe,
no,
and
and I think there would be there'd be a really good market for it because as you were saying, there's so many things in the West as well which are popular and people just buy it just because they sort of they've read about it and they're fascinated by the work, but they don't have things to buy with it. So just having t-shirts or something like that, I think you'd go a good way with that. Yeah.
yeah. So not only that, we're also planning to come up with figurines and pots in a certain shape. Like there are
Mm.
a lot of ideas going around. This thing that's behind me also. This is a painting of for people who are not watching again. Come on YouTube,
It's
I guess.
it's 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 uh, it's a
Right.
picture of it's a painting of the Buddha, is it? Or
Buddha, and it's
yeah.
it's made by one of the artists of
Oh wow.
itihasology. So we're also so the aim is also again youth driven and homegrown, because I don't want to make this something that's very based on a branded industry based
Of
on
course. Yeah.
I want the youth to be really
No, you'll
interested.
you and you'll also lose a lot of what you're actually trying to put out if you sort of corporatize it, if I may say,
Mm-hmm.
because they'll say, oh, these are we have clipboards and notepads, and these are the things that's
Yeah,
worked in the past, so maybe you should do it this
exactly.
way. Whereas what's actually brought you to success will probably be lost because you'll say, oh, you're just like the other person who's doing it, so why should
Right.
we buy from you? Does that make sense?
Exactly. So
Yeah.
those are some of the plans that we have. Yeah.
That's fascinating stuff, man. Listen, Eric, this has been an amazing chat. I've loved every second of it.
Yes, same.
I'll be back in Gurgaon soon. Hopefully, we can have a chat sometime again if you'd like to. But yeah,
Yes,
hopefully, I've not
absolutely.
bored you or something.
No,
But
this was very nice. Yeah,
but
so
but just before you go, if there's anything
right,
you'd like to plug for the viewers, where people can find your work, your team, and yeah, feel free
right.
to.
So there's only one place that we are primarily working, the platform that we work on, it's Instagram at the rate itihasology, but we have started a YouTube channel too now. So that too is youtube.com/itihasology. You can find us there.
You know what,
And
Eric? You guys should
yeah,
actually start a podcast, like, because you guys have a lot of knowledge in certain areas, and I know you have specialists, like specialist students who have worked in certain, let's
right.
say, research areas. Maybe just sitting down, having a conversation with them, or letting them have their way, and telling what they've researched about. Because I genuinely feel there's a lack of that in, let's say, the
Hmm.
Indian space
Right.
market. I think you
All
guys
right.
could do some good work there.
Well, thank you for your input because especially coming from, a podcast background
Dude,
as
I'm
well.
I'm 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 not as popular, but like, yeah, it's just something I've taken away because
Yeah,
I think the podcasting market is still growing in India, and yeah, you
right.
guys should capitalize, I guess.
Yeah, so we'll definitely look into that. So thank you, Shan. This has been really good, very engaging. Though we went off on many tangents, that's something
I
that
think
I
that's what people are
especially
here
like.
about. They don't want
Yes,
7 minute clips of
exactly.
the prime minister speaking about some other things.
Yeah, right. Okay, then.
Anyway, thanks a
Right.
lot. I know it's quite late there, but yeah, have a good day.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Okay, bye bye.